Hello and welcome to Quilting with Lori. Today we are going to be working on part 2 of my fall 2024 Mystery Quilt Sew Along here on YouTube. I can't wait to show you the blocks that I finished from week 1, and also I want to get started on showing you how to proceed with week number 2's project. So many students have joined me on this process. There's a link below in the description box. It'll take you out to where you can register. If you have already registered, you'll have received the PDFs that are in the confirmation email, as well as any additional PDFs that I've created since the time that you registered. And if you have any questions, just contact me through my contact page on my website. But I want to get started now on showing you what you can do for this week's step. So on my tabletop here, I have some of the blocks that I did from last week. I have a total of 12 of them because we needed to make 12. I was going to make 3 different variations, but I ended up just following the pattern and making the two variations. But you can make any number of variations of this log cabin block. Maybe you have chosen to go really scrappy on your fabrics, and so then you will have a number of really beautiful scrappy blocks. But mine just happen to be 2 different colorways here that I've used. And now this week we are going to, we're going to be working on the applique block for the center of this quilt, and that is the pumpkin and leaves. So you'll want to cut a 9.5-inch square for that. And then for the setting triangles, you've got the measurements in your instruction sheet to cut certain size squares, which you'll just cut on the diagonal. So you'll have a total of 8 setting triangles. And then you'll cut a couple of smaller squares, and the dimensions are in the pattern. And then you'll cut those on the diagonal, and you'll end up with 4 corner triangles. So all of that is ready to go. Now we're going to work on this applique block. Once you have your center square cut out, this is the 9.5-inch square, I went ahead and pressed creases in mine vertically or diagonally on each side. And those creases will just help me to place my applique pieces on here. So that's what I'm going to be doing. The quilt itself is going to be sewn together on diagonal rows, so this block will end up on point. And so keep that in mind, and that's why I've creased mine diagonally from corner to corner, and that will help me to place my applique piece. You want to make sure once you place your pieces on here that you leave yourself at least a 1/2 inch or more all the way around, just so that you're not going to be sewing your applique pieces into the seam allowances when you add this block to the center quilt. So just keep that in mind. Now let's take a look at what we're going to do to get our elements cut out of the paper piece fusible backing.
Bailey decided to join me downstairs.
So Bailey is enjoying my company downstairs here today, but she does snore quite loud. If it gets really loud, I will send her upstairs. But I think at this point you can still hear me. She's a Boston Terrier, and they have a flat little noses, and it causes them to snore quite loudly. So I apologize for that. But she just wants my company, so she's down here with us. So we're going to take the PDF, which is the templates of the pumpkins and the leaves, and these are the little stripes that go on the pumpkins, and these are the veins that will go on the leaves. And do not cut this apart. This is your paper template. Make sure you keep that intact. There is no reason to cut this apart at all. That way, for any future quilts that you want to make using this, you still have it intact and you've not lost anything. You're simply going to take your paper-backed fusible and you are going to put it on top of the paper. Let me see if I can. Here's this pumpkin here, pumpkin bee. And you're going to lay it on there and trace it on the paper portion of your paper-backed fusible. And we're going to use the dark lines. There are dotted lines. When I design patterns in my EQ8 software, it always offers the dotted 1/4-inch seam allowances. So those dotted lines are your 1/4-inch seam allowances if you choose to needle turn. For me, I really just need to get my projects done quickly. So needle turn is something that I save for projects where I'm going to be traveling in a car. So what I'm going to be doing on for this particular quilt is definitely raw edge applique on my machine. So we are going to use the dark lines for tracing. So I've traced out everything, and I've tried to trace the elements in groupings that are going to go on the same fabric. So these two pumpkins, I'm going to put on a pumpkin colored fabric. So I've grouped them together, and then I can simply cut them. Let me grab my scissors here. So I can simply cut out the grouping from this paperback adhesive. And then I'll be able to secure that or press that, this is the gluey side, onto the wrong side of the fabric. And then once it cools, I'll be able to cut it out on the drawn lines. These are a bunch of the veins for the leaves, and they're going to be cut out of a dark color. So I've grouped those all together. There's the veins for the large leaf, the medium-sized leaf, and the small leaf. So they are grouped together, and I can press this to the back or the wrong side of the fabric that I want to use for the veins. And then these are the little stripes on the pumpkins, and I have drawn those together in a grouping so that I can now press this to the back side of whatever color I want to use. The pattern goes with a kind of a gold or the cream background. You can use whatever colors you choose to. You might want these to be dark or a different type of a pumpkin color, whatever you choose to do. This is your quilt, so have fun with it. So now I have my templates all traced, and I have transferred the letters onto all of them so I see exactly what they are. Now I'm going to press these onto the appropriate colored fabric. Here are the elements. I did cut this. These are the 3 leaves that are going to be used. And I did remove this one from the end because it didn't fit on my little piece of wool fabric. I am using wool. I am going to machine applique it on my sewing machine, but I'm using wool, and I'm going to use some threads these are woolly poly, and it's more of probably a 30 or 40 weight thread. So it's a thicker thread, and it will give more definition, I think, to the stitching around the applique piece. I haven't decided yet. I'll figure that out when I get to my machine, if I'm just going to do a straight stitch or if I'm going to do a blanket stitch on this. Probably for these really curvy leaves, I'll do a straight stitch, and probably the same on these veins. I've decided to use this brown for the veins on the leaves. I'm using the striped green for the leaves themselves. I'm using the striped pumpkin for the pumpkins. There's just 2 of those. And then these will be instead of the deep creases, there'll be more of a highlighted area on the pumpkin, and I'm going to use this light peach or pumpkin color. What I'm going to do now is take this to these iron and get these pressed to this fabric. And I'm trying to conserve fabric. I just have little chunks, so I want to make sure that I have enough fabric for when I do the corners of our quilt. And you'll see that coming up in when we do our borders. I have pressed all of my template elements to the wrong side of the appropriate fabric. So these are going to be the highlighted areas of my pumpkin. These are my pumpkins. These are my veins for my leaves, and these are my leaves. And so now I will take a smaller scissors and I will cut on the dark line and cut them out. And make sure before you do any of that that it's completely cooled. And use the directions on your paper pieced fusible, whatever type that you buy. There's so many different variations out there and different brands. Just follow the instructions on how long you should press it and what temperature you should use and whether or not you should use steam. Usually they don't use steam for this, but there might be a brand out there that actually does require that. So just follow the instructions on whichever fusible paperback that you're using. So I'm going to start cutting them out, and I do like to conserve fabric as much as possible. So on this little piece, I've just cut out that grouping, and then I'll put this in my basket to save for when we do the corner blocks. And now I'm going to cut these out, and I'll do the same with all of that. Let me go ahead and get these all cut out, and I'll be right back. So I have all of my elements cut out, and they are fused, and I'm removing the paper backing from all of the fused elements. So the sticky glue is there. And what's wonderful about that is that you can put it somewhere on the block, but you can still move it around and it will stay where you put it. So when you start placing your elements, just follow the picture or make up your own design. You don't necessarily have to follow the picture, but I placed the pumpkin sort of down in this corner here, and I placed one of its veins on top there, or the highlighted portion of the pumpkin, whichever you want to call that. And so there are those. And then we're placing this leaf, and it's going to kind of go right over the top of that. And then this leaf here is going to go just like that. And this pumpkin is up here. This leaf is right here. So I've got the pumpkins and the leaves placed. And remember, I have already removed all of my paper backing. And I'm going to put these on here. I don't know if I've got that straight. I might need to move that around a little. I'll look at it from the, here, let's see. And then these are my veins. One of the petals on these leaves does not have a vein. There's only 4 petals that actually have a vein that runs through it. And so there is one on each leaf that doesn't have a vein. So just keep moving your veins around until they fit nicely on your leaves. Go ahead and finish placing all of the elements on your block. As you can see, I have done a little bit of overlapping. You don't have to follow the diagram on the PDF. You can certainly do whatever you want, but just make sure that everything is placed to the center, and keep in mind that this block is going to be on point. So this is the bottom of my block, this is the top of my block, and it will be sewn into the quilt this way. And I've just made sure that I've got plenty of room all the way around here so that when I do sew this block into the quilt, I will not be sewing any of my templates into the seam allowance. When you are completely happy with how it looks, if everything is just the way you want it, then and only then take it to your ironing board and press it. Because this is wool that I'm working with, I'm going to use a pressing cloth over the top, and I will steam press it so that it adheres to the block. With your quilting cotton, if you're just using quilting cotton for your applique pieces, you don't need to worry about the pressing cloth so much unless you're just wanting to protect your iron. But go ahead and get it pressed. Once it's pressed, it is permanent. And then we're going to set up our sewing machine for applique and get this block appliqued.
I threaded my machine with this woolly poly. It's more of the deep gold color, and that I think is the color I'm just going to use for all of the elements here. I do have this orange, but I think it's just too bright of an orange, so I've chose not to use that. I have actually already done the stitching on one of these elements here, and I highly recommend that you first of all stitch down these areas of the pumpkin and those veins on the leaves. Once you have those stitched down, then everything else is already secured, and then you can continue. I simply did an edge stitch, a straight stitch, and I pulled up my bobbin, put a locking stitch in it, and began stitching using my pivot quite a bit as I went around it, and then did a locking stitch, pulled up the bobbin, and cut it. I guess I see here I didn't cut that bobbin thread as close to the top as I needed to, but that way you don't have anything on the bottom of your work. Everything has gone to the inside. So now I'm going to go ahead and straight stitch this. I will straight stitch around this element here and this one, and I will get as close as possible, like maybe 1/8 to 1/16 of an inch away from the edges. And then I'll continue with the veins, the pumpkins, and the leaves. I have finished all of the veins and the smaller sections of the leaves and the pumpkins. Now I've just pulled up my bobbin thread here, done a locking stitch, and now I'm going to start stitching around the leaves. And I chose to use the same thread for all of the elements. You can certainly use a complementary thread or a contrasting thread, whatever you choose to use. And mine is a woolly polyester. It's kind of an interesting thread it's very fuzzy, as you can possibly see there. You might not be able to see that. So I had to use a needle threader to actually thread it in my needle. And I'm simply going to go around here and finish stitching. And I'm just using a straight edge stitch. I'm not doing anything fancy. Typically with wool applique, you're doing a nice blanket stitch by hand. I am not taking the time to do that. I need to keep moving quickly to be able to stay in front of you all on this class. So I'm going to get this stitch using my machine, and then I'm going to proceed and show you how you're going to sew all of these blocks together, because today we're also going to sew the entire center of this quilt together. In case any of you are interested in this thread, it's a woolly poly made by Superior Threads. So you could go to the Superior Threads website and you could probably find it. It's very fuzzy. I'm trying to get it close enough here where you can see just how fuzzy it is. I'm sorry, I just hit the camera. I apologize. But it's just a really fuzzy thread. And here's a close-up of the pumpkin and the stitching using that thread. It just gives a nice defined line, and the color really just kind of blends in with everything. I'm using it on all of these elements, the dark green, the light green, and the two pumpkin colors. All right, there's the back, and there is the front of this block. It's all applique. Now we're going to start putting this quilt center together. Square up this block to 9.5 inches, and then it will fit all of the rest of the blocks. Here's another peek at that thread. The color number is SW029 from Superior Threads. It's a woolly poly, and you can see just how fuzzy the ends of it are. There's lots of strands of poly wool that they're using to create the strand of thread. Now we're going to start laying out the center of our quilt in diagonal rows. So I have the instructions for you in your PDF, and you're simply going to start at one corner. So here is the top, which is one corner, and it's those smaller triangles that you cut. So you put one of those there. Then you're going to use your setting triangles, and you're going to make sure that you place them on each side of one of your log cabin blocks here. And so I've got that laid out, and you're going to sew. When you sew this together, you're just simply going to line up the perpendicular seams there, and they will hang off the edge, and that's good. You want them to hang off the edge. There's going to be some dog ears, and that's great. That will allow you to be able to square things up later. And again, on this side, you'll place it just like that so that everything is lined up, and you're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam here and a 1/4 inch seam there, and flip it open. And I am going to press all of these toward the dark whenever possible, because I don't want those dark seam allowances to show through in my light background. Once I have this sewn, then I'm going to sew the top here to this. And a simple way to do that is to simply fold your triangles in half and get a crease there, and then fold your pumpkin log cabin in half and match up the creases so that they match perfectly in the center, and then you'll sew that. And there again are going to be some dog ears hanging off, and that's good. You want those dog ears hanging off. So this is row 1 and this is the top. Now we're going to start with row 2. Let me move this out of the way. So you're going to grab some of your blocks here and make sure that you orient them just as the pattern shows here. So I'm going to use a dark one there. I'm going to use a light one here. And a light one over here, I think, is what I'm going to do. And then I need 2 setting triangles again. And watch how they're oriented. So they're oriented like this and like that. I'm not sure if you can see all that or not, but again, you'll sew them up here, and I'm going to press the seam allowances toward the dark, and I'll probably go ahead and press these toward the center also.
It's what's really nice to be able to do from block to block and row to row. Have your seam allowances go the opposite directions so they'll nest beautifully. So that's the goal here. But whenever possible, press toward the dark so that it's not showing up on your light background. So that is row number 2, as you can see here. Then you're going to do row number 3. Let me get these sewn, and then we can probably have enough room so that I can start showing you how to put row number 3 together. I wanted to just show you how I've sewn the top, and these have not been pressed yet. But you can see there are dog ears on each side, and that's very important. We want to make sure there are dog ears. When we actually trim this up after it's been pressed, you're going to make sure that there's a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance all the way around so that you don't lose any of these points of your blocks. So I'm going to take this and press it. Right now, I'm going to be pressing all of this to the dark here. So I'm going to take this to the iron right now and get the top in row 1 pressed. So here's my first section, the top with row 1. So that has been sewn. And I pressed this row here, the seam allowance, toward the dark. I pressed these seam allowances toward the dark, and I pressed the inside ones toward the dark as well, toward this direction. So that is how I've pressed everything to this point. I would recommend, before you actually start sewing, because you might have an assortment of different colored log cabins, as I do, you might want to play around with the arrangement from the pattern. Just to see what you come up with. So go to the design wall or the floor, and first of all, lay everything out. Lay out the rows as we have done here. And then just make sure that you like the arrangement. You might want to move things around a little bit. So be aware of that. And then once you've done that, then you can go ahead. And I like to place a pin between each block that I'm going to be sewing, and then I can take it to my machine and I'm not losing my place. So as you see, I've got some of the orange blocks that are going to be coming through here. I'll be placing another one here. And then the gold are kind of surrounding. They're in the perimeter of this quilt. And then on this row where we're putting the applique block in here, we're going to be adding these 2 little corner blocks on each end. And again, you can fold them in half, press it, get a crease there, get a crease on the end block that you're using before you match it up, and get that sewn on there. So I'm going to go ahead and pin all of these and then get it sewn together. And then I'm going to duplicate this part of the quilt because basically it's the same as this area down here. And then my whole quilt can get sewn together.
One thing I wanted to point out, when you're putting these rows together, you're actually putting together the rows on the diagonal. So some of the blocks might look a little funky, but when you put that quilt center straight horizontal like that, it will work out beautifully. So if you take a look at this this diagonal row right here that I put together, I've got 1 gold block and 2 orange ones together. And that might look funny as you're putting things together, but once you actually put the quilt all together and then turn it so that it's sitting horizontally with everything on point, then it will make more sense. I've got 3 gold blocks on the bottom, and then I have 3 gold blocks on the top, and then I have 6 of the orange blocks in the center of this quilt. Once I sew this together, I'll put this down on the floor or design wall and I'll photograph it so that you can see what I'm referring to. I have the 2 halves sewn together, the top half and then the bottom half, which includes the center row here. And so now I'm going to be sewing that last bit together right there, and this whole quilt center is put together, and then we're going to square it up. I've completed mine, and I see I have it laying on the floor here upside down for you, but that is the quilt. I have the gold blocks on the top and the bottom. The orange blocks are in the center, so I have a total of 12, and I just made 2 different kinds. I was going to do 3, but I ended up just making 2 different color variations. And if yours is really scrappy, that would be very interesting too. I'd love to see that. Just keep in mind right now what I'm showing you is with my center applique block upside down. I really love it. I'm excited that it's finished, and I can't wait to start on the borders. So week number 3 is going to be the borders. This center quilt needs to be squared up to 38.5 inches. And make sure that you keep your 1/4-inch seam allowances on every one of these points. And because you had the dog ears, you shouldn't have any problems with maintaining that 1/4-inch seam allowance on each and every one of those points. Thank you so much for joining me today for week number 2 of our fall 2024 Mystery Quilt Sew-Along, and this is called Pumpkin Logs. And now I'm showing you a picture of the quilt where the applique block is in the right position there with the pumpkins hanging down. And I love the quilt. I hope that you do too. I hope many more of you will join us as we work on this. It's a very simple pattern. It goes together very quickly. And if you do machine applique, that obviously goes together very quickly as well. I did that block in about an hour this afternoon for the applique. So thank you again for joining me for week number 2 of our fall Mystery Quilt Sew-Along. And keep your eye out in your email box. You'll get another PDF for week number 3 this coming weekend. And then the video tutorial will come out later in the weekend coming up. So keep your eye out for that for those of you who have already registered. And for those of you who have not yet registered, simply go out to my website in my shop, quiltingwithlori.com. There's a link below in the description box. It'll take you right to this course. It's a $15 course for the pattern and all of the video tutorials. So hopefully you'll join us. Until next week, have a wonderful week and happy quilting.